Alright guys, welcome to a classic movie review of 1944's The Uninvited, starring Ray Milland, Ruth Hussey and Donald Crisp. Now this was the debut feature from Lewis Allen. It's the spooky tale of a brother and sister who discover a huge derelict house and purchase it for a cheap price. The reason being, as we and they will soon discover, is that this beautiful gothic seacoast mansion has a past that's both complicated and terrifying. Now this was one of the early Hollywood movies to feature haunting or supernatural activity that wasn't played for laughs, and thus lays the groundwork for many a haunted house horror movie throughout the next 8 decades. It's an odd movie for me though, as it's got some bizarre shifts in tone that make it odd for anyone expecting out and out horror, but fret not, this is still creepy and atmospheric and an old fashioned ghost story. Let's take a look.
Stella! Stella! Stella, stop!
So 1944's supernatural mystery The Uninvited finds Londoners Rick and Pamela Fitzgerald, played by Ray Milland, and Ruth Hussey, both vacationing on the southern coast of England, Cornwall I think, with their little dog, and they stumble upon an abandoned mansion that Pamela is convinced the pair must buy together so he can sack off his job as a music critic and focus on composing in his own right. But they do end up purchasing it from one Commander Beach, who was played by Donald Crisp here, who lets it go for the measly sum of £1,200. Now, we'll soon learn that his haste to sell is due to the traumatic memories he has of his daughter mysteriously falling to her death there. This, of course, resulting in subsequent tenants complaining of supernatural shenanigans.
Are you trying to tell us the house is haunted?
No, Miss Fitzgerald, no house is haunted. But I had some tenants 5 years ago who complained of disturbances.
And now thrown further into the mix is the Commander's 20-year-old granddaughter, Stella Meredith, played by the lovely Gail Russell, who's not too happy about the house having new owners and who will soon become the centre of a spooky mystery. Now, I've always enjoyed this movie and I respect its place in the pantheon of classic haunted house horror movies. It has an intriguing central mystery that slowly unravels towards a jigsaw falling into place climax that I will not spoil here for anyone yet to see it. And that's because I'm a big fan of the work that the plot does here to drip feed us little snippets of the mystery. We do find out the identity of the spook quite early on, but not what's really going on or the reasons that the spirit seems to have some unfinished business. And what this all has to do with Miss Holloway, played by Cornelia Otis Skinner, who now runs a private sanitarium, and how Stella Meredith's artist father used to have an attractive Spanish model just hanging around his studio. Now, another interesting thing to remember here watching The Uninvited is that the studio added some spectral visual effects to the movie after the fact. They only feature for a handful of seconds, but it's interesting to imagine the film without them, as it could almost play just as some kind of ambiguous thriller. Anyway, the cast here is, of course, great. We have Ministry of Fear and the Lost Weekend era Ray Milland as Rick Fitzgerald, the would-be composer whose sister pretty much tells him he's buying this house with her, and who's also at the centre of a little bit of an uncomfortable romance, which I'll get into in a moment or two. I do like Milland's work in general though, things like Jamaica Run, Dial M for Murder, etc. However, I'm not sure what's going on here, or maybe what the direction from Lewis Allen was, because he plays this character just on the verge of comedy. Now, he was fresh off a musical with Lady in the Dark and a comedy in Forever and a Day, so maybe that's bled over into his performance here. But it's undoubtable that he stays in a tone far too upbeat and light-hearted, considering this huge spooky new candlelit home features the cries and moaning of a dead woman. Now, it could be something to do with the fact that his character has a romantic spring in his step due to the fact he's made friends with the daughter of said ghost, Stella Meredith.
Now look here, young lady. If you want to talk me out of Windward House, you might just as well save your breath.
Oh, it isn't that. It's about me yesterday afternoon. My behavior was inexcusable.
The script, by the way, making sure audiences are more than aware she's of age, seeing as though she looked very, very young here. Both Russell and her character were 20, with Ray Milland not far off 40 probably here. It's jarring as Russell does play her quite childlike. Gail Russell, incidentally, should have been a huge Paramount star, but her alcoholism would sabotage this and ensure that she was dead at just 37 years old. Now, on the flip side of this, I do love Cornelia Skinner here as Miss Holloway, former nurse and head of the local sanitarium. She's more dangerous, probably, than any of the people in her actual care, and predates Cuckoo's Nest's Nurse Ratched by about 30 years. She's a pivotal part of the supernatural puzzle, and, interestingly, one of the reasons The Uninvited became an underground lesbian cult film. Really, no, this was the mid-40s, so any queer audience the film found was absolutely underground. And this aspect of the film escaped me for a few years until a bit of research threw up this quote from the National Legion of Decency. Quote, "In certain theatres, large audiences of questionable type attend this film at unusual hours. The impression created by their presence was that they had been previously informed of certain erotic and esoteric elements in the film." End quote. Which, of course, is absolute nonsense, but proof, if it were needed, that the film's themes went beyond just spooks and spectres, as this amazing sequence in Miss Holloway's office will show you. Beneath a near life-size portrait of Stella's dead mother, Mary Meredith, she recalls an intense connection to Mary.
Mary was a goddess. Her skin was radiant and that bright, bright hair. The nights we've sat talking in front of that fireplace, planning our whole lives. It wasn't flirtations and dresses we talked about. We were no silly, giggling girls.
So The Uninvited is set in 1937, which excused the film from having to mention the Second World War at all, and was based on Dorothy McArdle's novel Uneasy Freehold, with British stage director Lewis Allen making his first movie here, greatly aided, of course, by Charles Lang, who was Oscar nominated for his atmospheric black and white cinematography, which is actually probably the real star of the film here. It takes picturesque country life and coastal vistas and paints them as this sinister and cavernous house on the edge of a treacherous cliff surrounded by crashing waves. Now, for me, any movie, especially in black and white, where candlelight is the only form of illumination, is instantly more eerie and spine-chilling. The production design here is pretty special. The fateful artist studio room that's central to the plot, despite having this huge window, somehow seems even more claustrophobic than the rest of the house. Now, elsewhere in the cast, you're going to find Barbara Everest as the Irish housekeeper Lizzie Flynn, and Alan Napier as Dr. Scott, all doing fine work. The Uninvited actually spends time giving us a bit of character depth, something mostly dispensed with in many modern horrors. Now, it's funny because I rewatched 1999's remake of The Haunting recently, and that thing's unfortunately a retina-scorching CGI mess of a movie. And regardless of how little of The Uninvited that you find truly terrifying, it's unfortunately clear that in the 55 years between movies, Hollywood hasn't managed to improve upon just a dark corner of the frame, some far-off ghostly cries, and a woman with a white sheet over her head. Go check it out.
It's coming toward us.
What in thunder is this?